When people think of Seattle today, they often imagine towering skyscrapers, busy ports, and a thriving economy built around technology and trade. Not that many people realize that much of the landscape that makes modern Seattle iconic did not originally exist in the form it is in now, and was almost completely man-made. Between 1890 and 1935, Seattle underwent one of the most dramatic urban transformations in American history. Engineers removed entire hills, straightened rivers, created new land, and permanently altered the natural environment. These projects transformed Seattle into a major economic center, but they also displaced residents and disrupted ecosystems that had existed for thousands of years. The industrial terraforming of Seattle fundamentally changed local society by expanding economic opportunities and creating valuable new land, but it also came at a significant social and environmental cost. Seattle's story began in 1851 when Arthur Denny and his party first arrived in the region. Their initial settlement at Alki Point proved difficult to maintain, and the group soon relocated across Elliott Bay to what is now Pioneer Square. The location offered one major advantage: a deep water harbor. For a growing settlement dependent on shipping and trade, access to a reliable port was critical. However, nearly everything else about the location presented challenges. The land was dominated by steep hills, sharp ridges, muddy tidal flats, and wetlands that flooded regularly. Much of the early Seattle was built on wooden stilts because the ground itself was too unstable for development. Wooden sidewalks connected buildings standing above mud and standing water to reduce the effects of the constant floods. Despite the difficulties, Seattle continued to grow. Lumber, fishing, and trade helped transform the settlement into an important regional center. Then, on June 6, 1889, disaster struck. The Great Seattle Fire destroyed much of the downtown area. Because most of the buildings were constructed from wood, the flames spread rapidly throughout the city. While devastating, the fire also created an opportunity. As city leaders planned to rebuild, they realized they could do more than reconstruct the buildings. They could redesign the land itself. When rebuilding the city, the first major challenge that they had to deal with was the flooding. City officials raised street levels throughout downtown Seattle, creating stronger infrastructure and reducing water-related problems. But flooding was only one obstacle. Seattle was trapped between large hills that limited transportation and expansion. Under city engineer Reginald Heber Thompson, Seattle launched some of the largest earth-moving projects in American history. The most famous of these projects was the Denny Hill Regrade, beginning in 1908. To do this, workers used a process called hydraulic sluicing, which involved blasting hillsides with powerful hoses. During the project, approximately 20 million gallons of water were used every day in this process, with most of it being supplied by Lake Union. Entire sections of Denny Hill were washed away, and in some locations, the landscape was lowered by more than 100 feet. At the same time, another major project transformed Beacon Hill. Engineers carved an 85-foot deep cut through the hill to create an important rail corridor connecting the city center to Rainier Valley. The scale of these projects were extraordinary, especially with the city's lack of a large population. In 1900, Seattle's population was only around 80,000 people. Projects of this size were usually associated with major metropolis cities such as New York, not a relatively small lumber town on the Pacific coast such as Seattle. However, not everyone benefited from these large projects. In an interview by Esther Mumford with former Beacon Hill resident Sandy Moss, they provide insight into the experiences of those living through these regrades. Moss described how homes became unsafe as surrounding land was removed and how many residents were forced to relocate. Some believe that the compensation offered by the city did not adequately cover their losses. For many residents, progress came at a personal cost. At the same time as these other projects, engineers sought out to transform the Duwamish River. Before construction, the river wound through a complex network of wetlands, mudflats, and oxbows. Although this environment supported wildlife, it could not be home to any other developments on its surrounding land. The river, being very shallow at points, also made industrial shipping very difficult. After the project had been completed, Reginald Heber Thompson, the man behind all these projects, believed that when the engineers had straightened and dredged the river between 1913 and 1920, the river's length was reduced from approximately 13.5 miles to only 4.5 miles. Through the completion of the straightening of the Duwamish River, it had dramatically improved transportation efficiency and created valuable industrial land. The project helped Seattle compete with Tacoma as a shipping center and contributed to the growth of industries that would later include Boeing and major shipbuilding operations. When working on these projects, the earth removed did not just go unused. Instead, it became the foundation for entirely new landscapes. Millions of cubic yards of soil were transported to the Duwamish River estuary and nearby tidal flats. This repurposing of the dug-up material helped create Harbor Island and much of the modern Soto district. When the main section of Harbor Island was completed in 1909, it became the largest man-made island in the world at the time. Harbor Island was viewed as proof that Seattle could compete with larger cities for trade and industry. Seattle's transformation continued with another ambitious project, the Lake Washington Ship Canal. For decades, local leaders had hoped to connect Lake Washington and Lake Union directly to the Puget Sound. The construction of the Ballard Locks, the Montlake Cut, and improvements to Salmon Bay finally made this vision possible. The creation of the Lake Washington Ship Canal greatly expanded transportation opportunities and strengthened Seattle's economy, along with at the time creating the Ballard Locks, the second largest lock system in the world and only second to the Panama Canal. Ships could now move directly between inland waterways and the Pacific Ocean, creating new commercial possibilities for businesses throughout the region. However, these benefits gained from the project came with environmental consequences. When the canal opened, Lake Washington dropped by approximately 9 feet. This permanently altered the region's hydrology and caused the Black River to dry up completely. For native communities, including the Duwamish people, these changes disrupted salmon runs and damaged ecosystems that had supported local populations for generations. The economic impact of Seattle's terraforming can be seen throughout the changes in land use around the city center, like in the areas surrounding Lake Union that were once dominated by factories and mills, which had increasingly become commercial and residential spaces over time. This goes along with the land that had once been considered inconvenient or unusable near the waterways, that had become some of the most economically valuable property in the city and surrounding areas. These changes to the land created new jobs, expanded trade opportunities, and encouraged continued population growth. Seattle was no longer a simple lumber and fishing town. It had become a modern industrial city. By the mid-20th century, Seattle's landscape had been fundamentally transformed. This can be shown through the more than 50 million tons of earth that had been moved, the hills that had disappeared, the rivers that had been redirected, and the new industrial districts that had been created where wetlands and tidal flats once existed. The industrial terraforming of Seattle dramatically changed local society. It expanded economic opportunities, improved transportation networks, and helped establish Seattle as one of the most important cities on the Pacific Coast. At the same time, it displaced residents, disrupted native communities, and permanently altered the natural environment. Today, Harbor Island, the Ballard Locks, the Duwamish Waterway, and much of downtown Seattle stand as reminders of this remarkable period of engineering and transformation. Seattle was not simply built, it was reshaped, and the effects of that transformation continue to shape the city more than a century later.